Today's guest is Hersh Rephun, who specializes in selling the truth at making reality digestible, often with humor and always with humanity. His eclectic career spans 2 decades as a brand storyteller and as a stand-up comedian playing gigs across the country. And he also hosts the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. So Hersh, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
Good, Drasko. Thanks for having me. Doing well. Doing well.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear, as we were saying before the recording, like it's Friday, so always a good thing to do on a Friday. So I'm glad that this is how you're choosing to spend it. So what I'd love for you to dive in for us, because I know we went into some of this before we started recording, but like your story and how you got to doing what you're doing, because as your bio says, it is pretty eclectic, pretty quote unquote random, but I know there's always a story that connects it all together.
Yeah, what I thought when I always go back to being 7 years old, and I don't know why, but I remember being 7 years old and standing next to the piano in my house and giving my Oscar speech that every kid who maybe wants to be an actor, wants to be famous gives. And I remember thinking that I was going to have an eclectic life because I was creative. What I didn't realize was that what would become so eclectic about it was going to be the marriage of art and commerce and the weird, windy way in which I went through life, kind of straddling a more traditional and secure and stable career with the more fun and creative and exciting artistic creative endeavors. And I often would beat myself up in the process and say, oh, you shouldn't work in advertising because it's too limiting. And uh I wasn't even a copywriter when I started out. I was a rep for directors of TV commercials. So I picked the one thing that was the least creative, being an agent. It's like someone wanting to be a movie star, instead they become an agent. Um, I grew up in Miami Beach, grew up modern Orthodox Jewish. So there was kind of a very interesting dichotomy there, in that the 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 most adored and beloved thing in my house was humor and comedy, but being a comedian was not a job for a Orthodox Jewish boy, because you'd have to work on the Sabbath, work on Friday nights and Saturdays. So I was taught to embrace comedy and be funny, but not to do that for a living because it wasn't practical. And I tried to satisfy both sides of that. So I went into advertising, and not even in a creative position, but I also went and did stand up for fun and did shows and did some things. And every now and then I'd get paid to do voiceover or do something like that. But I was still very strictly observant. And so when I was offered the opportunity to go on the road as a stand up comedian, I turned it down. And I said, no, I'm Sabbath observant. I can't go on the road as a comic. I was also having my first child at the time, so it didn't make sense to be away so much. So I went through kind of straddling those two worlds. And I think that's why I could play gigs all over the country as a comedian. I joke that I became as successful as I possibly could become as a comedian without actually making a living, because I was doing clubs, I was doing shows, but I wasn't really making money. My money came from my other work, which wasn't really satisfying. And even though I'm less observant now, I'm still practicing Judaism, but I don't do it with the restrictions I used to. Uh, I've never really settled into a very focused groove where I'm one or the other. I'm either a right brain or a left brain. I can do both, and I do both, but I think that leaves some lack of fulfillment and satisfaction on both sides.
Super cool. And I think it's like your unique experience of that kind of typical conflicting interests story, right? Like I have this tradition and family and societal like pressures that I need to honor. and then that's kind of juxtaposed and a conflict with, okay, the expression that I want to have and where I want to go, and what it is that I want to make. And it's kind of like what I'm here is like finding the balance between the two, right, where I can satisfy
Yeah.
both and like move forward. So would that resonate with you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So in that case, so if you to bring it like all this back to the present, like where does this leave you now as far as, okay, like what's my biggest like business challenge? What's my like limiter as far as what I want to achieve on the business side?
Okay. Well, from the point of view of recognizing what I really do well, and well, let me go back a little bit. So with COVID, I still have a kind of a boutique creative agency with a business partner. We were doing quite well before COVID hit. And then because we were doing a lot of experiential advertising, events, parties, things like this, um, that work dried up very, very quickly. And coming through COVID on the other end, my partner and I both kind of realized we weren't being incredibly fulfilled or diverse enough in what we were doing. So we launched a streetwear brand called the Kosher brand. But that's a build. That's something that takes time to nobody expects to make money within, 6 or 12 months of launching that. So it gave me a chance to reconsider what I was doing professionally as either as a comedian and performer and all of that, and also as a copywriter, brand storyteller, message person. And that's where my podcasting opportunity came into the picture, because I was like, oh, I can host a podcast called Truth Tastes Funny. That was an idea I had for a stage show. And I thought, yeah, the truth tastes funny. It'll be a podcast. It will kind of be self-help, entertainment, entrepreneurial. And at the same time, it will give me a chance to reinvent this other side of my career, which is the brand side, the brand storyteller side. But the biggest problem is that as a creative consultant, it's viable. But the more I talk to entrepreneurs, the more I recognize that scalability is such an important factor if you really want to make exponentially more money. As a consultant, are you really going to make $150,000 one year and $300,000 the next year? Is that a viable, when it's all me that's doing it? I'm the person providing the service. You might come up against this with some of your guests, that they feel like they're doing everything and it's working to a certain extent, but where do they go from there?
Got it. So in your own words, then what would be like the actual problem? Like, is it not enough like revenue? I'm not scaling big enough. I can't uh do or implement the things that I need to do. Like, what is it in your own words that is the biggest issue?
I think now the biggest issue is having my offer translate uh, into a real revenue stream. Whereas right now it's based on the contacts I have, a little bit of random business that comes in, but I'm not established as a commodity on the scale that I need to. I'm a niche player where I'm known within the advertising industry. I'm known within the production and post-production communities, but I'm not known to small business people, businesses everywhere that may need a really great idea man and message person.
Okay.
So I'm not marketed as wide as I need to be if I'm going to scale my, even to get to the level where, let's say my target is, $500,000 in revenue, which feels to me through various things, certainly, a workload that I could handle. If you get to 500,000, you get to 1 million, Now you feel like, okay, I don't know that I can service $1 million in individual clients. Perhaps I can, but that first level where you break through and redefine yourself and reintroduce yourself, I think that's probably the biggest hurdle right now.
Okay. And just to make sure that I've heard you correctly with that. So the real issue is like, okay, so I have this skill set that I'm known in a very niche market for, and I would like to expand that so that I can hit these milestones as far as revenue. Like really, it kind of sounds like get to my fullest capacity in terms of what I can produce on my own. Would that be accurate, or am I miss something?
It's close. What you're missing, which is on me, because that's what makes this a tough nut to crack. It's even hard to explain. So within the niche, I'm known as a publicist. That's how they think of me, as a publicist, because I help get exposure for people who create ads, right? That's pretty simple as it is, but you can't really apply that elsewhere. If you want me to do, if you were to say to me, hey, Hersh, can you do some PR for me? That wouldn't really make sense to me, because I would need to have relationships at financial magazines. You know, I would need to be a publicist. In the niche that I was operating in, I could do publicity, but my strength was being a writer and writing great stories about them and then pitching them to ad trades. I don't have an interest in being a general market publicist. So I'm redefining my image more toward being a creative director, a copywriter, and as I describe it, a brand storyteller, working with brands and businesses, which I've also done, and breaking that image out. And
Okay.
it's hard. And the struggle that you have trying to nail all this stuff down, you know, to even nail down what the problem is the actual thing. This is what we're doing now, and me trying to explain it to you. This is the problem.
Got it. It's like that lack of clarity.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can give someone else clarity. I can give a client clarity. If you came to me with a problem, I could probably solve your problem creatively or offer you creative solutions for certain creative problems and messaging problems. I could tell you how to speak about yourself, but when I'm doing it, as well written as those things are, I still think there's some ambiguity left over.
Okay. So if you were to imagine that there is, on some level, a payoff to the confusion and in the lack of clarity that you're experiencing, what do you think that payoff might be?
A payoff, like, what do I get out of it? Out of being confusing?
Correct.
Like, why would I persist, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like on some level,
On some
hypothetically
level, I must
speaking.
be getting something out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you could imagine what that might be, if you could guess what that might be, what do you think it might be?
I would guess that because what I really want is to be creative and have people just come to me for my creativity. That's what I really want. Go to Hersh for his creativity. You want him to act in a movie, you want him to be comedian on stage, you want him to speak at an event, you want him to moderate. Go to him and he'll do all these things for you and you'll pay him for it. That's what I would like. What I don't like is selling and explaining and telling people what I do. And
Got it.
so
And if
that's,
you were
yeah.
to choose one thing, would that be considered creative to you?
The one thing, what would I choose? Or
Like,
would,
because you said, okay, like I would like people to pay me for my creativity. And in
oh,
that,
right.
there's a lot of different things that fall under that boat. From, you said like emceeing, you said writing, you said
Right.
acting. There's a lot of different things. So if you were to choose one of those things, would that still feel creative to you?
Uh yeah, that's a really well phrased question, because I think if if it were being a comedian, let's say, let's just use that one. I would say, yeah, that would be enough. And any other things that I do that came from that would be fine. But I would be perfectly happy being a comedian. But if you were to say, oh, well, choose being a copywriter or a publicist or even a brand owner, right? I wouldn't be happy with any of those as my sole
Okay.
defining role.
And what's the distinguishing characteristic or characteristics between any of those and a comedian, which you said you'd be happy with?
I think it's the organic nature of it. It's very simple. It's very, you write material, you come up with material, you make observations, you get on the stage and you deliver the observations. And of course, the comedians act, or comedians do voiceovers, or comedians host podcasts, but that's all an extension of the one job, right? They're doing it in the context of that job. To me, it's the most organic and natural thing. It's when I feel most myself. Everything else is me playing a role as a different. I'm playing a copywriter. Am I playing a copywriter well? Yeah, I'm playing it really well because people pay me to do it. But I still feel like I'm playing the role of a copywriter.
Got it. So one feels authentic, the other one doesn't feel authentic.
Yes, right.
Okay. So in that case, is it I want to get paid to be creative, or is it I want to get paid to be a comedian, or is it I want to get paid to actually be authentically expressed?
Um, I think I like being paid to be authentically expressed. So that might, I mean, that could mean a few different things, but I think that's the best way of putting it. Because if you said, oh, I want to hire you to do a voiceover, I wouldn't think to myself, oh, but that's not stand-up comedy. You know, I think that would be great because that would be an authentically expressed role that I would be playing. And
Okay.
that would be fine. And, you know, and so I think that, I think that that's accurate. Being authentically expressed is key, but I'm able to contort myself one way or another into doing things that don't feel completely authentic or are really forced a little bit.
An example being something like the copywriting. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, yeah. Selling myself that way. In
Okay.
other, the selling of it is the hardest part. Because
So
think about it,
selling myself to get paid to be me is the part that doesn't feel good.
it's hard. It's hard when the further you go. If you imagine it as a scale, the further you get from yourself, the harder it gets. So it's a scale is the way that I look at it. So that when somebody says, for example, oh, you should have a course, you should develop this into a course. That's a big thing. People want to do a master class or a course or what, you know. And I feel like, well, it depends on whether that's really organic or that's a real stretch. Now I got to make up. I did a TED type talk about advertising at a conference, and I felt really out of place, much more so than I did just doing comedy at the conference. And I realized I should have done both. I should have combined stand up with a talk and made it a funny talk. Instead, I put on the suit. I tried to be the serious advertising executive, even being myself, I thought, but it felt completely wrong.
Right. Like I was putting myself into a box.
Yeah. Yeah. I was putting myself into a thing and I was like, okay, but that's what they want. So
Got
I'll
it.
do that.
So if you were to go back to well, okay, so I'll give you like my observations and then like
Sure.
I'll ask the questions, right? Because it's right now there's a lot of conflicting narratives and a lot of conflicting like internal interests. I want to express myself. I have these skill sets that I've developed that aren't actually an expression of myself. I feel most expressed within comedy. And then when I veer away from that, then I feel like I'm stifled and in some ways like repressed or pretending to be something that I'm not, but I'm at odds because like I have skills everywhere. So which way do I go? Do I get paid or do I express myself? Why can't I get paid to express myself? And it's like this constant kind of loop back and forth. So before
Yeah.
I continue, like does that feel accurate to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you started this whole conversation, right? You started it with breaking down your background as okay. So I grew up in this traditional household. In this traditional household, I was most myself and I was making people laugh. But growing up, I was at odds to actually do something with it. So it's like the same pattern of the only way that I can get ahead in life is if I put myself in a box and not be authentically expressed. And if that box is one that's appropriate to, in that instance, it was my parents, then I can do something with it. But otherwise, I have to compartmentalize my authentic expression. And God forbid I get paid for it because there's like this old conflict. And to me, from your stories, like that same conflict is one that hasn't really been resolved as you've gone through life and developed all these other skills. Like it's I'm playing out the same thing, just trying to get to the root of it, but I'm always like circling around it. So how does that land for you?
Well, that's right on. That's pretty spot on. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's accurate.
And is that something that you've realized before or not really?
I've I think I've realized it because it's kind of like when you struggle with something and you're aware that you're struggling with it, but that doesn't mean you have the answer for you don't have the cure, just because you're aware of the affliction.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think habitually happens is as soon as as soon as I get validation from one side or the other, I go with it. In other words, if I were to get right now, like last year, I had a very good year as a creative director, right? I got a lot of assignments. So I was making good money last year doing that. So I was happy in that particular thing. I was not focused on the comedy. I was okay with that. I was okay to, you know, when 2022 started and those projects didn't come, there were no new ones. And so I had a little time where I was like, okay, this is slow. Then I would automatically go, well, I should do stand up. I should go do a show. And I start working on a show and that makes me feel, validated, but I'm not making money from that. And then so that's what happens. It's not resolved. I'm aware of it, but I can be placated in the short term
Right.
by business, by money. But that's only in the short term anyway.
Right. Because then it's not like right in front of your face. So that I don't have to actually
Right, you're
look at it or
distracted.
address it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think that the real deep question, the part that's really important is what does it mean about you to get paid handsomely to be expressed authentically?
Those words make sense, but what was the question? What
So
is the
what would it mean about you? Like
oh,
if right now you received $1 million to be authentically expressed, what would that feel like? What
oh,
would that mean about you?
I think it would validate the viability of my authentic expression as
Okay.
a
So
career, as a
pause right there, right?
yeah,
If I got paid to authentically be me, it would validate me being me,
yeah, yeah.
right? So
That's right.
somebody needs to validate and give me permission to be me, at which point I can be myself.
Yeah,
Is that really true?
it's true. Well, I think it probably is true because
So again, pause right there.
yeah,
Somebody has to validate you being you before you can allow yourself to be you. Like you see how it's
I
before I've
see.
even started diving in and saying I'm going to be me, the presupposition, like the perspective, the lens through which we view this hypothetical is the only time that I can be me is if I get permission to be me. And I get that permission by being paid to be me, i.e., I'm really just reliving the same story that my parents said, which is you can't get paid being authentically you. But if I could get paid, then I could like validate and be like, well, look, like I can. Somebody said I'm allowed to be me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I
So I
think that
think for
is true.
you, that's where unpacking those beliefs, because look how like they're so deep seated that you didn't even like recognize it. In fact, like your brain started arguing for like, well, yeah, of course, then I'm validated. Of course it's going to be like that. Right. So it's
Yeah.
there's a deep seated belief and a deep seated paradigm that I have to get permission to be me, then validate through an external source that I can be paid to be me, at which point I now have the authority and the permission to actually go out and be me, which completely invalidates the fact that somebody would pay you to be you until you decide to be you as you are.
Right. The flaw in that is that that doesn't work, and it doesn't work that way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cart
Yeah,
before the horse. Yeah,
you have to be yourself, and then someone will pay you to be you if that's what you want. If that you is on the market to be
correct.
consumed. Yeah. And and I do think that the two things, and that doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy doing stand up when I wasn't getting paid, and I enjoyed being me, but that was kind of a guilty pleasure in
Correct.
my scenario, right?
It's the thing
Yeah.
that you're allowed to do when you're out making money doing the appropriate
Right.
validated thing.
Right. So if
Right.
I have five copywriting gigs or of those niche PR gigs, and then I go on stage or I go for a week and do stand up, I can because I'm allowed to because I've earned my keep for that period. And
Correct.
so now I feel good doing that work too because it's letting me go do that, letting me go
Correct.
do that
I've
thing.
earned my ability to
I-
be authentically expressed.
Right, right. I've earned some authenticity chips.
Yeah. So that I think
Yeah.
for you is exactly where the success, whatever form is going to eventually take, whether it's stand up or some other version or whatever. But to make peace with that loop, it really is going to come back to unpacking those root core beliefs surrounding the permission, the validation around being authentically expressed, what that means about you, how you're allowed to actually be visible in it, express it, and most importantly, actually make money from it. Because
Yeah.
right now, I think you're always going to self sabotage when that opportunity comes up. So, how does that land for you?
So when you say that I'll self-sabotage, what am I self-sabotaging? What
Well,
part am I?
number one, like you're first searching to be validated before you authentically express. So it's like that whole desire of I want to get paid to be authentically expressed can't happen because you're going to stop yourself from being authentically expressed.
Right.
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 Like number
Okay.
one. Number two, as you've said before, it's like the pattern is always I go find a box that pays me so that when I get paid, then I can, in a small scale, get my authenticity fix. Right.
Right.
Which, if you were happy with that, wouldn't be an issue. Like that's fine. You can get paid and then do your thing. But there's a deep desire here to connect it too. Right. So the
Yeah.
self-sabotage comes from I'm always going to keep those two disconnected. And if I ever see them connecting, I'm going to do something to make sure that they don't. Because if they do, then it fundamentally destroys that worldview built when you were younger about what was appropriate and what wasn't. So does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does if I because I do have this feeling like as much as I have gone on stage and gone for it, right? Professionally speaking, I didn't. So I always come back to that time when I was 22 or 23, having my first child, still religiously observant, and not going on the road and saying that would have been me making that break. I would have broken with those traditions. I would have disappointed everybody on one level, but I would have been authentically me and gone and done it.
Right.
Succeed or fail, but I would have gone and done it. And
And in
because
the
I didn't,
process, right, you disappoint the one person that you have to live with all the time, which is yourself.
right, right. So I lose,
Yeah.
the other people win, and the other people don't completely win because people know when you're not completely happy. They know when you're struggling. They know when you're frustrated. They know when you're self-sabotaging. So I think that cycle persisted. And as I've gotten older and I have 5 kids. And so it's like, 3 of them are grown, 2 are still at home. The necessity to achieve, commercially, financially, whatever it is, that still remains. So that dichotomy is still at play. So the idea of just saying, "Oh, well, I'm going to abandon everything and go and just be authentically me," is now inextricably tied uh, to that validation, right?
Yep. I would totally agree. And kudos to you for like having the awareness and the open-mindedness to see how it all comes together. But really, again, circles now back to unpacking, removing those root beliefs to allow for the freedom to really express and allow those pieces to integrate. Right. Like,
Yeah.
what would my life be like without these beliefs, and live it from that place. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's beyond the scope of like what we can do in this particular episode and in this particular forum. But that's really where you need to continue to look, right? Like in that space to get rid of those beliefs and begin to live embodied in getting paid to be authentically expressed and leading with being visible in your own expression.
Yeah. Well said.
Cool.
Yeah.
So does that feel complete for you, or is there still something left outstanding?
Um, it feels pretty complete. The piece, what I think you've captured it is that there isn't really a good or bad side in it because I'm still good at all these things that I do. So I'm not pretending to be a welder, but I keep putting the pieces together wrong. You know, I I'm good at it, but there's an unnatural feeling about selling myself as
Yeah.
a tradesman, right? As a you know, and it's funny because it's not the quality of the work that I have a problem selling. It's this idea of me as that person. So
Correct.
so the
Going back to
question,
again being paid for
right,
authentically expressed, right?
right. So the question would be, am I going down the wrong road with the creative director, copywriter, brand guy identity And do I have to circle back to that original, really authentically expressed identity and nail that down, and then make sure I'm bringing that to the other pursuits? Like, you can only bring one identity to the party, is, I think, maybe the
Potentially, I think the answer ultimately comes down to when you get rid of the beliefs and you make peace with, like, I am content with who I am, what I stand for, and how I authentically express. That gives you the lens through which to view kind of the ripple problems, or the ripple effects of this, and make a decision about that. Because chances are, like, you didn't get into and learning copywriting just for fun because it can make you money. Chances are there was a piece of your expression that could
yeah,
be still be found in there, right?
yes,
And you
yeah,
said, like, it's like, I'm good at it, so it could be like a zone of excellence as opposed to a zone of genius.
oh
That's
yeah,
fine, that has its time and place as well, but discerning it means getting clarity and ownership and embodiment of who I am first. Then you can answer those questions just with like more certainty. Like, I know the answer to this. Does that make
right,
sense?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And it is a zone of genius versus a zone of excellence thing. That's an interesting dynamic, in general. I think a lot of people have that. They feel they're exceptional at something, they're good at something else. And we leave it to others often to decide what we should be doing. And that's a mistake. That's the,
100%. So
yeah.
in that case, to just close us off, if you could summarize in your own words, what what is it that you came into this conversation thinking the issue was, and then what were your aha moments as a result of it?
I think I came into the conversation curious about what I might be missing technically in terms of the effort to monetize and scale what I'm doing, and realize that it is completely a an internal dialogue issue, and some kind of switch, or some kind of shift that has to happen inside to lock these things in place, like a like any kind of widget, any kind of thing you're trying to get to work, and you can't get the thing to click in place, and you feel around for it, and sometimes by accident you click it in place. And what I think this conversation has helped crystallize is that it isn't the feeling around thing isn't gonna do it in this case. I'm gonna really need to open my eyes and look in at this mechanism and figure out where are these pieces going? Because I feel like I've been feeling around for forever. And sometimes they click in place, for 5 minutes, it pops out again. So that's how I would describe it.
Very cool. Love it. Well, Hersh, thank you very much for diving into all of this. And
Thank you,
if
Dresco.
you can just let everybody know where to find you, who's the best person to find you, floor is yours for that.
Yeah. I could be found at HershRephun.com, HershRephun.com, and all of my various skills and personalities and abilities are there. And if you look at the website, you'll get a sense from now, with the perspective of what we're talking about, exactly why it's laid out the way it is. But certainly, please listen to my podcast, Truth Tastes Funny, which is on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, and check that out and help that grow, because I think that that's the closest I've come to a really healthy and complete expression of myself. Um, so I would say, if you want to hire me for your problems, to help me solve your image problems and your messaging problems, HershRephun.com is the place. If you want to try to survive and thrive in a very chaotic world, check out Truth Tastes Funny.
Love it. Well, as always, we'll include those in the show notes. But Hersh, thank you very much for being on. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Drasco.